The story of the dinosaurs' demise is the coldest case in history. And for decades, the verdict seemed unanimous. A 6-mile-wide assassin from space struck the planet, and an entire world died in the aftermath. It's a clean, simple, and dramatic explanation. But when we, as investigators, re-examine the planetary crime scene, the evidence reveals a far more complex plot. What if the asteroid wasn't the lone killer, but merely the final blow in a murder that was already well underway? Now, let's open the case file on one of prehistory's greatest unsolved mysteries. Our investigation doesn't begin in space, but deep within the Earth itself. We turn our attention to the prime suspect in this conspiracy, a geological feature in modern-day India known as the Deccan Traps. This was not a single volcano. It was a planetary wound, a tear in the crust that bled lava on a scale that defies imagination. For hundreds of thousands of years spanning the very end of the Cretaceous period, this region erupted without pause. Wave after wave of molten rock poured out, ultimately burying an area the size of France or Spain under a layer of basalt that, in some places, is more than a mile thick. When we analyze the geological evidence, we are not looking at a normal volcanic event. We are looking at a large igneous province, a planetary-scale cataclysm with the power to fundamentally rewrite the rules of life on Earth. The sheer volume of material ejected is staggering, estimated at over 1 million cubic kilometers. This was a slow-motion apocalypse, an assault that began long before the tyrant king, Tyrannosaurus Rex, ever saw a star fall from the sky. The fossil record shows a world at the zenith of the dinosaur age, an established global ecosystem. But the Deccan Traps were the insider, the conspirator already at the scene, preparing to unleash a weapon not of fire and force, but of insidious, world-altering poison. This suspect's motive was not a single, violent impact, but a prolonged campaign of chemical warfare that would push the entire biosphere to its absolute limit. With our prime suspect identified, the investigation now moves to the forensic evidence. The true destructive power of the Deccan Traps wasn't in the lava that covered the land, but in the invisible weapon it unleashed into the atmosphere. When we analyze the geological record from the late Cretaceous, we uncover the chemical fingerprint of a planet-wide poisoning. This was a sophisticated, two-stage chemical assault designed to dismantle an entire world, piece by piece. The first agent in this toxic cocktail was sulfur dioxide. As hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers of magma erupted, it released billions of tons of this gas into the upper atmosphere. Our atmospheric models, treated as forensic reconstructions, show a devastating effect. This sulfur dioxide reacted with water vapor to form a thick, planet-encircling haze of sulfuric acid aerosols. This haze acted like a solar shield, reflecting sunlight back into space and plunging the Earth into a series of sharp, punishing volcanic winters. For a world accustomed to a stable, warm greenhouse climate, these sudden cold snaps were a profound shock to the system. Photosynthesis would have faltered under the darkened skies, stressing plant life from the bottom of the food chain up. But the assault didn't stop there. This atmospheric sulfur eventually fell back to Earth as toxic acid rain. We can only imagine the scene. Rain, acidic enough to burn leaves from trees, to poison lakes and river systems, and to alter the chemistry of the soil itself. When we examine the fossil record from this period, we find clues that corroborate this story. The fossilized spores and pollen trapped in rock layers show evidence of widespread stress on terrestrial plant communities. It was a chemical siege, weakening the very foundation of life on the continents. The great herbivorous dinosaurs, the prey for giants like Tyrannosaurus rex, would have found their food sources becoming unreliable and perhaps even toxic. The Deccan Traps were starving the ecosystem. Just as the world reeled from the freezing acid-laced winters, the second stage of the chemical attack began. The same eruptions that spewed sulfur were also pumping out even larger quantities of a more persistent killer, carbon dioxide. While the sulfur aerosols rained out of the atmosphere relatively quickly, the carbon dioxide lingered for centuries, accumulating with each new eruptive pulse. Unlike sulfur, CO2 is a potent greenhouse gas. The result was a climatic whiplash of epic proportions. The planet, having been plunged into a volcanic winter, was now thrown into a period of intense, runaway global warming. Our investigation of the geological evidence confirms these violent swings. By analyzing the chemical isotopes in the fossilized shells of tiny marine organisms called foraminifera, we can reconstruct ancient ocean temperatures. The data clearly shows a period of dramatic warming in the hundreds of thousands of years leading up to the final extinction. The world's climate was no longer stable. It was chaotic, swinging violently between freezing and boiling. This volatility would have been catastrophic for countless species adapted to a predictable world. Critically, this massive injection of carbon dioxide had another, even more insidious effect: ocean acidification. As the oceans absorbed the excess CO2 from the atmosphere, the water became more acidic. This is a silent killer, an existential threat to the base of the marine food web. Organisms like plankton, corals, and mollusks, which build their shells and skeletons from calcium carbonate, found that their protective armor was literally dissolving in the corrosive water. When we examine the marine fossil record from the Deccan period, we see evidence of a major crisis. Many of these vital foundational species go into a steep decline. The collapse of the marine ecosystem was not an overnight event. It was a slow, agonizing process of chemical strangulation. The timeline of this crime is what makes the case so compelling. The evidence is clear that the most massive eruptive phases of the Deccan Traps, known as Pulse 2, began approximately 300,000 years before the asteroid impact. This wasn't a contributing factor. It was a full-blown, world-altering catastrophe in its own right. The Deccan Traps had motive, means, and opportunity. For millennia, it subjected the planet to a relentless barrage of climate chaos and chemical warfare. It crippled food chains on land and in the sea. It poisoned the air, the water, and the soil. The world that the Chicxulub asteroid would eventually strike was not a healthy, thriving planet. It was a world already deeply wounded, an ecosystem already destabilized and pushed to the very brink of collapse by a killer from within. The stage was set for a final, decisive blow. After reviewing all the forensic evidence from this planetary crime scene, the final verdict can be delivered. The extinction of the dinosaurs was not the work of a single, lone assassin from space. The evidence overwhelmingly proves this was a conspiracy, a devastating 1-2 punch delivered by the Earth itself and an intruder from the cosmos. The Deccan Traps were not merely a suspect. They were the first perpetrator, the inside man who systematically poisoned the world and set the stage for the final act. The investigation shows that for 300,000 years, The colossal volcanic eruptions created a chaotic and toxic planet. The constant assault of acid rain, volcanic winters, and rapid greenhouse warming placed the entire global ecosystem under unbearable stress. Food chains, already weakened and brittle, were stretched to their breaking point. When we look at the final days of the Cretaceous, we see a world whose foundations were already rotten. The biosphere was sick, its resilience eroded, its great dynasties already fighting for survival on a hostile and unpredictable planet. The victim was already vulnerable, weakened, and cornered. Into this dying world, the second killer arrived. The Chicxulub asteroid was the executioner, delivering the final, merciless blow to an ecosystem that no longer had the strength to resist. The impact winter that followed, shrouding the planet in darkness and shutting down photosynthesis, was more than the crippled biosphere could withstand. The food chains didn't just bend, they shattered completely. For hyper-specialized apex predators like Tyrannosaurus rex, which depended on a steady supply of massive herbivores, this was the end. Their size and power, the very traits that defined their reign, became a fatal liability in a barren world. The king fell because its kingdom had already been turned to dust. The Deccan Traps loaded the gun, and the asteroid pulled the trigger. And so, we close the case on one of the planet's greatest catastrophes. The fall of the dinosaurs was not a random accident, but the result of a perfect planetary storm. A terrestrial betrayal followed by a cosmic coup de grace. It is a chilling reminder, written in stone, that no reign is absolute, and that all life, no matter how dominant, is ultimately at the mercy of the immense and unforgiving forces of the planet itself.